Good afternoon. This is a video essay on why low-tuned guitars can sound like shit if you don't approach them properly. Essentially, these guitars, the calculus, which is a great study of mathematics, there's issues in tuning. With guitars tuned this low, the fundamental frequency gets cut off. So if we just take the raw tone, actually we should do this one. If we take the raw tone of this particular guitar, I'm going to full screen this. Jesus. We can see that our fundamental here goes down as low as about C1. That's about the lowest note. Our second lowest one, we have the octave, since the harmonic series goes fundamental, octave, octave, perfect fifth, etc. Sorry, fundamental, octave, perfect fifth, etc. And then up from here, this next one's going to be a G. G sharp, G. And then so on. So then we'll have an octave. And then a third. And that goes on. So essentially our fundamental frequencies here are C, C, G, C, etc. Why is that important? Because when we put an amp on this, or when we look at notes as a whole, there are certain notes which sound good together. Those are called consonant frequencies or consonant notes. And there are notes which don't sound good together. So for example, these are made up of an octave and a perfect fifth. This high up, this high up, these frequencies still sound good together, and that's because of something called beating. Beating, in a sense, is the way that constructive and deconstructive interference happens. So I don't know if you guys have ever heard something like the Viljata minor ninth tone. Kind of sounds like the two frequencies are warbling, like they go, and this is especially accentuated down low, and you can literally hear it warbling. Wow, 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 wow. And if I do this on a sine wave, which is less complex, you will need headphones to hear that, by the way, but you can look up here. These two frequencies, what's happening is they're entering your ears at different times, and because the wavelengths down there are so low, and this does become this effect becomes less pronounced the higher up you go, but the lower down here, these intervals are so complex, they have a complex ratio with one another, they beat off of each other, the wavelengths hit our ears at different times, our ears has to process both of them, but because they're so complex it can't, so we get this beating sound. Another reason for it is that the wavelengths, because they are so long, when they are this close to each other, are so similar that they start to phase in and out with each other. And that's why we get that effect. There's another thing that can be said about this, something called the lower interval limit, which is one of my favourite topics in audio, because I'm a fucking nerd. So if we take a look at this... Jesus. If we take a... unorganised. Sorry, I apologise. If we look at these two frequencies here... Well, that's a nice perfect fifth. Or, Jesus, a major triad. Major third, sorry. Sounds good. We go down an octave below. Well, you're starting to hear a bit of beating there, but you can hear it kind of warbling. That's fine though, it's not too bad. Let's go an octave down. We start to sound muddy. Essentially, in a contemporary state, muddy refers to the relationship between two notes and their ratio with one another. In other words, muddy is directly attributed to intervallic dissonance, or the space between these two frequencies when it is not of a simple ratio. When you go lower down, you start to hear a sense of undefined. As we go lower down, it's harder and harder to tell what these two notes are. Up here we can da da. Down here, well, I've got no clue. The ratio becomes more difficult to understand as human beings the lower down we go. The higher you go, it's easy to understand what these two notes are. With all that being said, the reason that these guitars are not currently sounding good is because of that. The lower interval limit essentially states that any two notes which are too low down, too tuned too low down, will start to beat on off of one in each other. They'll become muddy, undefined, and essentially with these kind of guitars where we're really low tuned, the frequencies in the harmonic series start to beat off of each other. So although this is one note, we can have one single note C, but because the intervals, well, let's do it. Let's try it out. Let's C1, which is our note, and G. Super muddy, super undefined, no clue what these two notes are. Even if we go an octave above, still sounds a bit weird. There it seems clear and defined what these two notes are. So the problem with low-tuned guitars is that even if we just have this note at C, well, let's do it down here actually. At C1, let's do it here. C2, for example, if we take up Pro Q, this C, although it's only made of one note, it has harmonics on top of it. Fundamental. G. So what we can tell from this is that although this piano is only playing one note, in a way, it's forming a chord. But this is one note. And inside of this one note, there are harmonics. And its next harmonic is at G. Remember what we just said about notes this low down? When they're this low down, that starts to sound muddy. But that's literally what's happening in the harmonic series of this note. When we go this low down, the reason why this sounds undefined, can you tell me what note that is? Because I fucking can't. Although it's the same as that one. Doesn't sound like it. And the reason that is because the harmonic series of this note is so low that it disobeys the lower interval limit. So with all that being said, with these guitars, we can safely say that as we go lower tuned, if we still have that fundamental frequency, that low C in the harmonic series, the fundamental frequency, if it's still there, it is too low to be audible. So what happens? Well, let's apply an amp to it. I actually don't have a cab on this, I'm going to do that. So tell me why it looks like our fundamental frequency here, our most prominent first frequency is our fundamental frequency, and the first frequency here seems to be a G. Where's the C gone? There should be something down here. It's not there. Why is it not there? Because cabs were never meant to go that low. Cabs, when they were made back in the day, way back in the day, nobody was tuning past E standard. Maybe drop C. But these cabs generally have an internal high pass. So that means that first fundamental frequency is gone. Completely gone. And our first note is a G. That's our new first fundamental frequency, our harmonic. Our next one is a C. Well, if the note itself, if this guitar if the guitar is playing a C, and the first frequency in this is a G, what does that mean? How does it sound? Well, it sounds undefined because the note being played is a C, but our first fundamental frequency is the most important one. The fundamental frequency tells us what note this is, and it's playing a G because the cab can't go down that low. So in this instance, in this very specific instance where you're going too low, where you can no longer hear that, I would low pass, high pass. Because down there is undefined. The problem with guitars this low is essentially that the cab cuts off the lowest frequency, which makes the entire thing seem undefined, because our root note of this guitar has been completely removed, and our first one is instead a G. With all that being said, we need to understand that the relationship between a G and a C, so G2 and remember the FL Studio piano roll is an octave down, so I'm going to do this here. So this is what's happening in the low end of our guitar. No good. So we get rid of it. So that's one way you can think about this, and one way you can avoid having muddied up guitars is by removing frequencies from the low end which don't sound good. If you have a guitar, back to what I was saying about the high passing, if you have other layers on top of this guitar, don't high pass like this. You're just going to set it out of phase. Try and remove that frequency. So I'm going to set a higher decibel per octave, and I'm just going to get rid of it. And this is before and after. Still not perfect, but a lot closer. So that's how I would tackle that. I hope that was helpful to someone. Essentially what you can take from this is that cabs can't reproduce notes that are originally in the fundamental frequency of the guitars. If we look at the original fundamental frequency of this is there, and the first one that the amp can reproduce is the G. So we get rid of that because that's not the note which is being played. I hope that's helpful.